Evening, everybody. Jump right on it. So starting the first week of February, I started talking about the Four Noble Truths. And for those of you who weren't here for that, if you Google Four Noble Truths, Buddhism, there's tons of information. It is a foundational teaching, always a good place to start. And the Eightfold Path is part of that Four Noble Truths. So we're in the middle of talking about the Eightfold Path. The second week of February, we talked about the first part of the Eightfold Path, and that was the morality path. We discussed that for those of you who are suffering from post-traumatic church syndrome, where you have a past at a Christian church that you've kind of felt disillusioned about, well, much of the morality that you learned from that faith can continue to be very helpful. You just need to do away with a bit of that guilt and the judgment, which causes us to trip up in a Buddhist practice. It's not to say that guilt is bad. Guilt is a good warning sign. Hey, I did something wrong and I kind of know that I did something wrong. But holding on to that guilt for too long can become very disruptive to your spiritual development. So morality, also the reason why we start with morality is the immoral acts tend to be a huge source of suffering in our life. And so if you want to reduce suffering in your life, living a moral life reduces the suffering. So from a Buddhist perspective, it's just very practical. If you live a moral life, you suffer less. Nothing to do with, sin or damnation. It's simply saying that it will lead to less suffering. So very practical, in a very practical perspective on that. Today we'll talk about the second part of the Eightfold Path, and that will be the mental development. And so there are three in the Eightfold Path: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which are typically labeled as the mental development paths. And so we'll talk now about why Buddhism places this emphasis on mental development and why it's key to achieving freedom. So while morality helps to eliminate suffering in your life, reduce suffering in your life, mental development will actually increase the feeling of freedom, which is another goal of Buddhism. Before I get to that, though, I want to talk about, tell you a story. There's an old, I think it's a Chinese parable, and maybe older than, maybe older from another culture, but I first learned it as a Chinese parable, and there was a king who had a princess born to him, and he wanted to protect her from all suffering and from ever being hurt. And so he started by trying to place, lush, thick carpet around the palace, and then outside, and then around trees. And soon it just became too much. And so he asked the wise men to think of how are ways that I could protect my child. And so the wise men said, why not just make the child some shoes? The idea being that the shoes around your feet are easier to make and protects you a little more from getting your toes stubbed or stepping on anything sharp. This is key. This is fundamental to the understanding of a Buddhist perspective. You can use up a lot of time and effort and energy trying to change everyone else, trying to change the world, trying to change it so that you no longer have to worry about suffering because everyone else has changed. Or you can make your own shoes and suffer less. And the way we do this is by developing the mind. And the goal of developing the mind, the goal of achieving that freedom, or the way we do that, achieve that freedom, is by seeing the world as it is. In psychology, we have something called cognitive distortions. These are ways of thinking that cause us suffering, cause us distress. For example, if I were to say, oh my God, there's no way I am going to survive COVID-19. It's just the end of the world. I'm going to die. Everyone else is going to die. And the human race is going to go extinct. And this is just horrible. So that's a cognitive distortion called catastrophizing. And it's not a reflection of reality. And so part of the cognitive behavioral therapy is to get the individual to start thinking more realistically and to challenge those unrealistic catastrophizing thoughts. Buddhism called us to do this 2,500 years before psychology did. And so the idea is that we develop the mind so that we see the world as it is. And in doing so, in preparing the mind to be more realistic, to see the world as it is, we protect ourselves from those elements within ourselves and within our environment that increase our suffering. The other reason we focus so much on the mind in Buddhism is that for Buddha, and not just the Buddha, for many philosophers and for even physicists, we create the world through our own minds. We experience everything in the world through our mind. We are, in a sense, a walking matrix movie. Right? Our brain is plugged into a body that has plugged into senses, that's plugged into different parts of the brain, either working together. And we have no way of proving without a doubt that I'm not part of some hologram or some part of a holographic computer image, holodeck from Star Trek. I can't prove that I am actually just a brain in a jar being pumped in all this information to make me think that I am actually talking to a group of people. Okay? So we are victims of that limitation. Our mind is our window to the universe, and therefore focusing on that mind, that bottleneck, that point of entry, then we are able to have greatest leverage on growth, on spiritual growth, on developing freedom and developing that sense of joy. So this is pretty important. This part, this section here is pretty important from a Buddhist perspective. Let's talk about the three paths then. The first one is right effort. Right. So the right effort is that we have to cultivate the right attitude or motivation. And so we want to be confident and enthusiastic towards our understanding. So we want to be confident is not the same as arrogant or foolish. So I'm not saying I know it all, but confident that this is the right path for me. You do that by listening to yourself. And so you'll have a sense, this is the right way for me. So you're confident you're doing the right thing. You're enthusiastic. I really don't want to suffer. I really want to be joyful. I really want to be free. And so you cultivate that enthusiasm and that motivates your actions. I'm not being a moral being just because some external force won't punish me by being moral. I am wanting to be a moral being because I will suffer less, I will experience more joy, and I will be freer. So that's the right attitude, the right effort to be cultivating in the mind. But you want to do these things because these help to better yourself and better your mind. Now, there are four things to keep in mind when it comes to right effort. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I think one day I will dedicate a whole Dharma talk just on these four. So one effort, so there's four parts to this right effort. One, effort to prevent unwholesome thoughts from arising. Two, efforts to reject unwholesome thoughts once they arise. Three, effort to cultivate wholesome thoughts. And four, efforts to maintain those wholesome thoughts. And so the idea is you're going to try as much as possible by living a moral life, by being more realistic, to not have unwholesome thoughts, unhealthy thoughts come up. And when they do come up, because they will come up, we're only human, you make an effort to not feed them more fuel. You make an effort to not keep them around for very long. And then you also want to cultivate healthy thinking, healthy, wholesome thinking. Whether it be being more compassionate towards other people, more understanding of other people, and then trying to maintain those positives. So those are ways that you should be channeling your energies, your right effort. So that's right effort. Let's talk next about right. Oh, actually, here's another good parable about right effort. And it's one of my favorite parables to talk about. And it's usually my answer to anyone who tasks me about, well, how much should I be practicing? All right, so that has very much everything to do with this right effort. There was a musician who went to the Buddha and asked the Buddha, Lord Buddha, how much should I be practicing? The Lord Buddha sat for a while and thought, and then responded. And he said, you're a musician, aren't you? And the musician said, yes. When you play the sitar, and I'm going to just say guitar, when you play the guitar, what happens if you tighten the strings too much? And the musician went, well, the notes get high pitched, it's almost shrill and grates, and if you tighten them too much, the strings will break. Buddha nodded and then asked, and what happens if you loosen the strings? Well, the sound goes down, and if you loosen them too much, then the strings stop making any noise and they're really just flopping around on the guitar. And then the Buddha asked, and what happens if the strings are just right? And I said, well, then you make beautiful music. So then the Buddha said, that's how you will know that you are practicing just the right amount, when you're making beautiful music. So you don't want to be so gung-ho, oh my gosh, I'm going to meditate 3 hours, 1 hour a day, 1 hour each time for 3 times a day, 7 days a week, go full force. That's like tightening the strings too much, and you can't keep that type of effort up very long. But neither do you want to just do meditation once a week at a Buddhism 101 meeting, in which case that's like the strings being too loose. You're not practicing enough. So you want to find that nice little middle ground, that balance, where it is challenging, but not so challenging that you're tempted to quit. So that's right effort. I'm going to go through the next ones a little bit more quickly. I think right effort is usually the one that we have most questions about. But let's talk about now right mindfulness. Okay, right mindfulness is an awareness or attention and avoidance from distraction or cloudy mind. Right. Our minds are rarely still. In fact, you will find in some of the sutras, the holy writings in Buddhism, that the mind is often described as a monkey mind. It's just jumping around from tree to tree, from thought to thought. It doesn't stop. It just wants to keep going. And if you try to be still, oh my God, I got to check my Facebook account. I got to go to see what's on TV. I'm going to flip through all 300, 400 channels that I have until I find something. Oh, you know what? I'm going to eat some popcorn while I'm watching this movie. And you know what? While I'm eating, I might as well turn on the music as well. And so we're constantly seeking that distraction, the monkey mind. And so what right mindfulness is telling us to do is to spend some time just quieting things down, to be more aware and attentive, and to avoid those distractions. There are 4 types of mindfulness. I'm going to give you the terms that they use in Buddhism, but I want to explain, and I use different terms because it'll become clear. So the terms in Buddhism are mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of consciousness, and then mindfulness of objects of mind. It's that feelings word that I tend to avoid because in our language, feelings is more about like our emotions. But what they're really talking about feelings as in, I feel this, the sensation. All right. So from the word that we use, and I see something, I'm feeling it with my eyes. And so that was the original intent of the original translation. So mindfulness of body is simply being aware of your body, being aware of a good practice of this is blindfold yourself and try to walk, or close your eyes and try to walk. You might want to have someone with you just in case. We are not aware of how much our vision is used in keeping ourselves balanced. But if you can practice walking with your eyes closed for a little bit, you start learning to be mindful of your body's position and the balance and the weight on your feet. And so you're learning a new kind of mindfulness of body. And that's not the only type of mindfulness of body. You want to be mindful of what hurts, what doesn't hurt, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. It's just awareness of the physical body. Mindfulness of body also comes in handy when I'm feeling something butterflies in my stomach. And so when you're mindful of that, it gives you pause and allows you to sort of reflect, then why am I feeling this? Is this anxiety? Is it just gas? Is it that I'm excited? And so being mindful of body can give you clues as to what's going on internally. Mindfulness of feelings or senses, meaning being mindful of what your senses are, what you're bringing into your body through your senses. A good example of this is what do we read and what do we watch? And so if we're constantly watching violent movies or pornographic movies, what that does is it desensitizes the brain. The brain becomes used to seeing gore and becomes less compassionate towards the suffering of someone who, might be really hurt. Or in terms of pornography, it is a distortion of reality, of the real, a distortion of what human sexuality is. And so as a result, if that's what we consume too much of, then it distorts our way of thinking, and we start seeing other individuals as objects of our pleasure. You exist only to please me, and that's the point of pornography, and that's where it becomes unwholesome. There are many other reasons for being unwholesome, but that's one example of how guarding your senses, what you're reading and what you're seeing, is important because it does affect your mind. Mindfulness of consciousness is just being aware that, think of how long it takes you to be aware of yourself when you wake up and how groggy you might be at the beginning. But slowly you awaken to your consciousness, you're more alert. And so you want to be more mindful of your consciousness, of your being. And then mindfulness of object of mind. Objects of minds are thoughts and feelings. So these are the emotions. So objects of mind, things in the translation of the text, there is no single word for heart or mind. There's just a heart mind. And so they don't make that division that we do in the Western culture. And so objects of mind are both your emotions and your thoughts. And so being mindful of what is that's coming up. Really good example that I had to catch myself recently on is I was expecting a certain person in my life to constantly be like picking at me, nagging at me. And so when I did something, I heard the voice in the back of my head of that individual nagging at me. And so what happened was it put me in a bad mood. So that when the person, when I actually interacted with the person, and the person just said something pretty neutral, I automatically gave it a negative interpretation, and it caused me to have a negative reaction. And the person did nothing. It was simply my thoughts, my unmindful thoughts, setting myself up for those reactions. So be mindful of the thoughts, the self-talk especially. How hard are you on yourself? Be mindful of that. So that's right mindfulness, right? And when we talk about mindfulness, those are the areas that those are the one way of thinking about the areas that enhance mindfulness in your life. Finally, let's talk about right concentration, right meditation, all right? This is a single pointedness. This is the ability to focus the mind on one thing. Being able to free the mind of those distractions and being able to be fully immersed, fully be present. We've all experienced this. So it's that time when you experience that song that you love so much, you tune out everything else in the world. It's that moment when you're off walking in nature and you come across a beautiful scene and it just takes your breath away and all you can do is just stand there in awe. It's that moment when you are in the middle of doing something you're really passionate about and really love, and you lose track of time. Those are right concentration and right meditation. That's the single pointed focus that we want to develop, to be able to use as a tool so that every time we are in pain and suffering, we can use that tool of single focused pointedness, focus it on that point of suffering and analyze it to death and disconnect from those chains of cause and effect that causes the suffering. So by developing the single pointedness, we're developing a superhuman skill. I like to call it a superpower that really helps us in our journey. Okay. Finally, one of the things that that single pointed net focus gives us is it helps us see things as they are. And so going back to that example I gave about that, I had all this nagging voice in my head of this one individual. And when the individual actually spoke and said something neutral, I did not react well. If I had maintained that single focus and really paid attention at that moment, I would have seen that that person said nothing but something neutral. There was nothing wrong with what was said. Right? It took me afterwards, so I did use it, but it just a little late. And that's okay. That's how you start developing and practicing this skill, is reflecting back on those moments that you maybe didn't act in the most skillful of ways. And so you can practice and determine what are the things that led up to that event. Once you develop these skills, the more you develop these skills, because it's not just you're done, you've developed them all. As you are developing these three paths, these three forms of mental development, they will open you up to greater wisdom. So some of the things I've said here today relate to wisdom already. And so it's hard to discuss one path of the Noble Eightfold Path without discussing the others because of how interlinked they are, how interconnected. But the moments of wisdom in your life stem from being able to do these previous steps already in some small way. The idea, again, is not that you have to develop this one one of these eightfold paths perfectly before you can move to the next, or that you must get it right in order to be a good Buddhist. The idea is to practice. You're not expected to be perfect. You're not expected to get it right. We just want you to practice. And when you get it wrong, reflect and then practice again. And that's kind of the message that you will hear frequently in Buddhism. Just keep practicing. And that's where the wisdom will come. And we'll talk more about the path to wisdom next week when we talk about the last two of the Eightfold Path. So thank you very much. So I'll leave it, we have about 10, 12 minutes here. And so I'll open it up. Anyone who has any questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to voice them now if you want to. Don't forget to unmute yourself first.
What was the first of the Eightfold Path? Because apparently I missed that.
Are you talking about the first three or the first one I mentioned today?
The first Eightfold Path, I guess. So we were starting with the second one today?
Okay, yeah, we were talking about the second grouping. And the first grouping is the morality grouping, and that's the right speech, right livelihood. Let me make sure I get them all right.
Action.
So right speech, right livelihood.
Action.
Yes, and right action. Thank you. So, and I posted that video from the recording of that session up on our Facebook page. And so if you find us on the Facebook page, you'll be able to see the recording from February 2nd, I believe. Yeah. So February 2nd was February 9th was when we did that meditation. So after February 9th, I think I posted it on the 11th or 12th. You'll find the video there.
Okay, thank you.
So I was wondering, since this path is so interwoven, is it a good idea to practice one thing and it'll probably have a ripple effect? You know, like, I don't know. I had an incident this week of I let my mouth run when I shouldn't have. And I thought about it for a long time and really had to think about what was really underlying causing all of that. And I was thinking I just need to practice dealing with the emotions that are, all of this is bubbling up, right? And I'm just wondering, does that fall into some of the other realms of this because it is kind of related?
Yes, yes. So remember, this division into 8 steps or eightfold or 8 paths is artificial. It's just one way of trying to help understand this underlying truth. And so there's nothing saying that you have to stick to this organization of it. If anything, what you're doing is a wonderful way to practice the Eightfold Path. Pick the element in your life that's causing you the most amount of suffering, reflect on it the way you did, and then practice. Try to do something different next time. Try to understand why you did it. Try to understand the underlying emotions. Try to understand the other person and their reaction. And so, use that focused attention to try and deconstruct what happened and learn from it. And that's where the wisdom comes in. So yeah, you practice one and it's hard not to practice the others.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that. And I have to tell you, after, because I was so mad at myself and was really down on myself, but when I really delved into it and realized where the underlying hurt came that made that reaction, I was kind of like, okay, I almost felt like that's reasonable. It's not something I want to repeat, obviously, but it was probably the first time I've ever felt like, that was just a mistake and I understand it, maybe. I know that's only taken 4 years, but
So that's good, because what you're showing yourself is compassion and understanding. So you're
And that
being
I haven't
compassionate,
done. Yeah.
which is often, I know Patty, you mentioned the sort of the Christian background. That's that part that's kind of lacking. We see it in, if you read, if when you read the Bible, you see that Jesus has that compassion and
Mhm.
understanding, and yet for some reason we can't, do that, or it's a hard time for us to do that for ourselves. Not just Christians, but Buddhists, everyone. We have this hard time being compassionate and understanding towards ourselves. And so what you just did was wonderful, because it means that you're being compassionate and understanding, and you have the wisdom to say, well, that was me then. I am a different person now because I understand it better. And so next time I'm going to try and do different.
Yeah, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't.
And you're not. You're no
Yeah.
longer that person.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about Buddhism. We'll talk about impermanence. And that's a manifestation of impermanence. You're no longer that person. You're a different person now. And it doesn't mean you're not going to fail. It's just you're going to fail in a different way now, hopefully.
What is?
But very good insight, Patty. Very good. And thanks for sharing that. It's a good example for all of us. Anyone else? Any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
For me, like the portion on the guilt is something that you know, uh, it's kind of like a work in process. I don't know. I'm trying to like really recall what you had mentioned, like, and I think it ties into like the monkey brain. I laughed during whenever you were like talking about that, but it's true. It's like you got so many things going on all at once that it's hard for everything to stay still.
You're right. It is very hard to disengage and to be able to disconnect and spend some time in stillness. Especially if you're a parent. And if you're a parent of young ones, even worse. But if you can set that example for the children, then you're giving them a wonderful gift. Think of how many adults that we know, and even ourselves, have a hard time being able to just dedicate 10 minutes to ourselves. And so when we can show that example to the children, we're giving them a wonderful gift. I had for the first time in a year, I finally had the house all to myself this last weekend, because my wife had to go to Houston for work, and then I shoved my kids off to grandma's house, and I had 24 hours all to myself, and it was amazing how much more insight and self-reflection I was able to do during that time that I couldn't do when I have kids asking for something. What I do, and the kids know this, is that they will see me if they walk in on me and they see me sitting on the cushion meditating. They know that I'm aware that they're in the room, and they know that I'll come get them afterwards. And so they've learned to just, oh, if it's not urgent, leave Daddy on his own. He'll come back and find me later. But that was something that had to be learned. I had to teach them that to do that. In addition to making time for yourself, the other difficulty is feeling like you deserve it. And so you have the mommy guilt, the daddy guilt, or you have the American work ethic guilt, that you don't deserve, or that you're being lazy, or that you're being unproductive, you're not achieving anything. And so there's that guilt that comes from parenting, that comes from the work ethic of the American society, from Western culture, not just now America, but most of the Western culture. And so we have to learn to give ourselves permission to rest, permissions to be with ourselves and to be still. And Sochi, I think the wisest words you said there were work in progress. And so that's really what it is. So don't be hard on yourself that I have to achieve it tonight. It's a work in progress. So if you can give yourself at least a minute, and if the only minute you get is by locking the door in the bathroom while you're in there, then, you know, that's what you get. And then you work from there.
Thank you.
Only got a couple more minutes here. If anyone wants to say any last minute words, it's your last chance. All right then.
And these meetings, these are when exactly?
Every Tuesday for the first 3 Tuesdays of every month.
First 3 Tuesdays.
Yeah, so the first 3 Tuesdays of every month at 6:30. How did you hear about the group?
I went through the meetup.
Good. So
Um,
if you go through the meetup and go to the calendar or events for the Buddhism 101 page, you'll have a different link for each week. And so that's so just follow the meetup, and now it's announced there, so you'll be able to see the schedule there. And then if you're on the, and I send out an email, I usually send out 2 emails every week, just sort of as a gentle reminder of what of the upcoming meetings.
Okay, good. Thank you, because I remember things very easily.
Good. And I think on the meetup, I have information on the Facebook page. So if you have a Facebook account, you can join that page and you'll be able to find these recordings of these meetings, which can be very helpful. Good. With that then, John, that's a good segue then into next week. Next week, same time, same, what was it, same bat channel, same bat time, for those of you who remember the old Batman shows. And so it's 6, I usually open the Zoom meetings around 6:15. And so if you want to come in and just chat, feel free to do that. At 6:30 we start. And then that'll be the first 3 Tuesdays. So next week, I will talk about the last grouping of the Eightfold Path, which will be the Path of Wisdom. And then the week after that, I'm guessing, I know we'll have a parable. I'm guessing Leon will have a parable for us in 2 weeks. Yes, good.